So Matt Goodwin put out this tweet some time ago. I think this was during the Rupert Lowe fiasco in March, pointing out that Reform had a seismic poll lead. And he started by saying, a week ago, more than a few people who lived their lives on Twitter suggested it was over for Reform, and then cites Reform's dominant polling average. Absolutely true. 100%. Nobody is disputing that Reform can win an election. But then, he says, some people on here, including unfortunately young people who have appeared promising but have now shot themselves in the foot, have disappeared down rabbit holes. They have lost sight of what is really going on in the country, how ordinary people out there are thinking and feeling, and what is actually required to win a general election under a first-past-the-post system in which people have never been socialized into the idea of voting for a populist alternative. Okay, it's almost guaranteed, because I know Matt and I've spoken to him a bunch of times, that he's talking about me and some of my friends, all of whom that you guys will be able to name and you've watched on the likes of Deprogrammed or on the Lotus Eaters or see on Twitter. The point is, Matt, and Reform more broadly, and this is a friendly point being made, if you are losing those people, you are not going to govern well. Because you are not recruiting from the general public the people that are going to be your candidates, your heads of department, that are going to be your spokespeople to win over that youth vote, which you believe that you need, and you keep saying they're doing great on TikTok numbers, but you still aren't winning over in sizable cohorts yet. You need those people. You do. And it could well be that we are not offering anything of value for you guys to talk to us, to hear our concerns, and to adjust accordingly. In which case, fair enough. We aren't needed. We will focus our political efforts elsewhere. But I'm telling you now, you're losing them. And it's not just me. You are really, really losing these people with antics like Zia Yusuf being in the party and then disappearing, David Ball saying immigration is the lifeblood of the country, and Nigel Farage saying any criticism is alt-right trolling and Indian bots. Now let's talk about Reform UK, and I feel the need to do this because I don't know what they're doing these days. They've made a number of statements which, when you add it all up, it begins to estrange the kinds of talent that they would want to attract as candidates, policy advisors, spokespeople, and supporters. And I'm not disputing the fact that they seem to be an indomitable election-winning engine because they remain top of the polls and they've exceeded 30%, and so they remain a viable opportunity to shatter the uniparty consensus as an outside and insurgent populist force, but that's if they want to be that. And at the moment, it seems that the personnel they are choosing and the things they are saying show that they don't want to be that. And the reason I'm making this video is not to estrange my friends who still support and even work for Reform, even though I think that these criticisms will be taken as an attack and will probably leave me on the outside, but I'm comfortable with that because I've never wanted to be a candidate or a party affiliate. I just want the party to live up to its potential. But I make this because I've been told by people in Reform that I've met and known that they listen to what I say, they follow me on Twitter, they watch my YouTube content, and they read what I write, and they take it seriously. And they've often been eager to assuage my concerns and encourage me that people are listening. Just yesterday, I happened to be near Reform HQ, and a young chap, he'll know who he is, came up to me, shook my hand, said, "Love your work," which I'm always grateful. You know, I just talk rubbish on the internet and call it as I see it, so it's nice to know that people think it's worth its merit. And he tried to encourage me that there were people on the inside who knew what they were doing. And I've met some of them, you know, Matt, Ed, Ethan, you guys know who you are. I've had good conversations with, well, one of their MPs that's still there, and the other, Mr. Rupert Lowe, of course, who is no longer still there, which is a reason why lots of people are disheartened by the way the party's behaved recently, but I'll get on to that later. But the main problems are, the party doesn't seem to know what time it is. It's still acting like it's 2014, and it seems to, by instinct or perhaps congenitally, fall back on squishy liberal talking points and peddle harmful fictions which not only box them into a very narrow space of operation within the Overton window, but put them completely out of lockstep with not just their voters, who, I think fortunately for the party, don't know that these clips exist because they don't spend much time online. They're more sort of TV watching boomers who are just sort of happy because they think Nigel Farage is funny on I'm a Celebrity and sort of doesn't want immigrants to keep taking advantage of them. And they don't really know what the party stands for because they're not that fussed about policy, but they're mainly estranging young right-wing talent who would be solid candidates, solid supporters, and who have lots of policy ideas and just want to be listened to. And I feel like I'm a fair authority to alert them to this and to caution you guys about this, because I am one of the vectors for that sphere. I interact with lots of them, I'm friends with lots of them, I spend a fair bit of time in Westminster, and as far as viewership goes, and this is not bragging rights, but I mean, my trigonometry interview did very well. It got 350,000 views or so, because people want to hear from young men the problems that they face. And a lot of those problems Reform just aren't addressing. And they don't seem interested in addressing it because we keep bringing our concerns to their attention and they ignore us. And I'm just going to go through a few examples in the last week or so, and then some older clips, to show that there seems to be a discouraging pattern here. And at the moment, trying to say to them, look, guys, changing your line on this will actually win you more support and allow you to attract the kind of talent that means that you don't just win an election, but that you're ready to run the country and actually address the problems we're all concerned about. Trying to tell them that feels a little bit like being in a relationship with someone whose potential you can see, and you keep trying to offer them solutions to their problems, but they're just not interested in fixing the problems, and so eventually you kind of comes to terms with it. I don't want that to be the case, but it does feel like it. Anyway, I want to start off, of course, with the departure of Zia Yusuf, the explosive exit of their former chairman, who tweeted out, "I no longer believe working to get a reform government elected is a good use of my time and hereby resign the office." This was after, and on the same day, he called Sarah Pochin dumb for saying she wanted to ban the burqa. Zia Yusuf didn't know this question was being brought forward in Parliament. He did not support the policy. As Andrew Pierce in the Mail wrote, he thought this was going to scupper his plan to bring thousands of Muslim supporters into the party. This is something that Majid Nawaz has said on a podcast with Winston Marshall, that Nigel Farage can win the moderate Muslim vote. Zia Yusuf has brought lots of Muslim donors around reform, which means reform becomes reliant on money that has ideological strings attached. I think it's fair to say that a populist party in this country that represents the left-behind patriotic British majority, who are principally concerned about immigration and not just the economic concerns, but the cultural concerns, are fine to not want a Muslim chairman. I do not want a Muslim chairman. I do not want a Muslim prime minister. It is clear that Nigel Farage, in all of his rhetoric, is lining up Zia Yusuf to be his successor. There is no other logical reason as to why he would make Zia Yusuf co-director when he is a latecomer to the movement, and lots more loyalists like Aaron Banks or Andy Wigmore or Alex Phillips were around, much more politically sound, and were passed over. And so, I think it is just as acceptable to say, I don't want a Muslim running my country, as it is acceptable to say, I don't want a communist running my country. Because Islam is a comprehensive set of ideas with political implications, which I reject, and which has nothing but contempt for the traditions of Britain and its, I suppose, ostensible, but still official, Christian religion. It is fine to not want a Muslim running your country, just as it is fine to not want a communist running your country. And we should accept that, and we should not treat them as if they are any different. Zia Yusuf resigned as chairman. Within 2 days, he was back. He was back, and his message made it sound as if he had received only positive comments about his time in Reform UK. Now, this isn't true. This is not true. And it's not that this is astroturfed by Indian bots. It's not that this is people wanting to sink the party. I mean, look at this. I just put a photo of Rupert Lowe saying vindicated. Remember, Zia Yusuf, for all of the talk of him having anonymous trolls insult his race and religion on the internet, which I don't endorse, there's no need to be unnecessarily inflammatory and disparage someone on their race. I think that's wrong. I'm not one of those people. Remember, he tried to have Rupert Lowe thrown in prison rather than level mild criticisms of Nigel Farage. I got a lot of response to this tweet, as did Rupert Lowe, as did Ben Habib, and there are lots of people here who are in the comments who have supported reform, who have voted for reform, who are notable figures who put their face to their name, just saying, we didn't like you. We're glad you're gone. Good riddance. And some reform supporters, like Aaron Banks and Alex Phillips, had come out and said that, and then had to walk those comments back a bit, because Nigel Farage decided to take Zia Yusuf back into the fold. Probably because it was going to be too difficult to unpick him as the co-director of the company without a significantly ugly and public legal battle. But the fact that Reform demand their supporters practice this cognitive dissonance to demonstrate loyalty, and the fact that they are so insistent on keeping Zia Yusuf in the party, well, that's a significant strike against my ability to support them. So anyway, Zia returns, he's leading Doge UK. I hope that the enterprise itself is successful, because I'm sick of my taxes being wasted on a bunch of woke nonsense. However, his replacement is David Bull. Now, I spoke to an MP about this, Reform MP, and they said to me, the reason that David Bull has been picked is because he is a long-time Brexit Party loyalist, he is a popular figure on Talk TV, I think he's got the 3rd highest ratings, and he is the sort of person that the local branches who were mistreated by Zia Yusuf will like, because he will MC events and he will sit down with your nan and have tea with her. That's all well and good. And that is the sort of character you do want in charge of your local branch associations. You want a morale booster, especially if the chairmanship is only a ceremonial position. The problem is the downward pressure placed on policy and the party line by putting David Bull in front of a camera when he says stuff like this. In his interview with ITV News, immediately after being selected as chairman, he said, and I quote, "Immigration is the lifeblood of this country, it always has been."
Are there any other items of clothing that you think are a threat to public safety?
So I think that the key for me about this is it's about integrating into this country. Immigration is the lifeblood of this country, it always has been. But also, if you come to this country, you have to adopt our culture, our systems, our values. And covering your face is a barrier to communication. And I mean that, whether it's the burqa or whether it's actually scarves, Antifa scarves, which are being put around your face, or crash helmets, or whatever it is. Because that is not the way to communicate. We need to rebuild communities.
Okay, first of all, no, the burqa is not the same as a bike helmet or an Antifa scarf. The burqa is a symbol of Islamic morality. And this is a really weak argument for people just saying it's a matter of public safety and a matter of trust. No. The burqa is premised on the fact that if women are not covered head to toe and demonstrating some form of modesty, then they invite sexual abuse by predatory men, because a woman's flesh, if not covered, acts as a perennial temptation for men. Women are causing men to sin, and therefore, if they aren't wearing a burqa and niqab, or at least a hijab, they are to blame for the sexual violence perpetrated against them. That is not how we do things in this country. We are Christian, we are Englishmen. We believe our women to be capable of equal moral dignity of a man, and because we know that how some men can act, they can be vile and predatory, actually, women deserve an extra bit of protection by the kind of men who love and want to take care of them. And that fosters a good relationship, a good high-trust social environment between men, women, and children. It allows families to flourish, and it allows people to walk the streets in relative safety, without needing to dress your women in bin liners and treat them as your property. Reform should be saying that. They're not. Instead, they're drawing a false equivalence between balaclavas and bike helmets, which I don't think people should be wearing, admittedly, and the burqa as if they're the same thing. They're not. Everyone wearing a burqa is an avatar of the mission creep of Islamic morality in London, in Britain, which is wholly incompatible with our way of life. They're not prepared to say that. And not only are they not prepared to say that, they're now peddling the lie that immigration has always happened in Britain and that we would be nothing without it. He might as well have said diversity is our strength, because the insinuation is that without immigration, we would be bled dry. That is not the case. Unless David Bull is asserting that between 1066 and 1945, our country was awful, he cannot believe this. Unless he is asserting that the Viking invasions and the Norman conquest, which, by the way, only had a minor impact on the genetic composition of the country and only replaced the ruling class as of 1066, and not the population on the whole. This is why you got the Anglo-Saxon Norman poem from Rudyard Kipling that says, as the ruling class, take care of those beneath you and do not trouble the different majority that you rule over. Unless he is saying that the Viking invasions and the Norman conquests are indistinguishable from the Windrush and the Boris Wave, then David Bull is making the argument that invasions, foreign invasions, are what made Britain great. And then he's saying, well, you have to assimilate to our culture. Okay, if immigration is the lifeblood of Britain, you are making the contradictory statement in saying that British culture is immigrant culture, and so immigrants have to assimilate to immigrant culture, which is why they can't practice their culture. Do you see how demented that is? Final part of this. If reform believes this, what is the point? Seriously, what is the point? If your principal concern of your voters is immigration, is assimilation, is both legal and illegal migration, and per the work of Eric Kaufman and Whiteshift in 2018, it has been the chief concern of your voters since Brexit, and it's not just about economics, it's about culture specifically. Economics is often the polite window dressing of cultural concerns so that you do not get called a racist, and I think people are so tired of being called racist because you get called racist for anything and everything these days, so they just don't care anymore. If you are not representing that constituency, the majority of the country, what is the point of reform? Now, he got some backlash from this, not least of all from me. Then he went on Michelle Dewberry's show on GB News and said this.
We are an island of immigrants.
No, we're not. We're not an island of immigrants. We never have been. We had less immigration between 1066 and 1945 than we have between 1997 and now. So we have had an almost 1,000-year unbroken chain of actually net emigration, and the emigration of Brits to other parts of the world like America, Australia, New Zealand, and the Empire was of tremendous benefit to those countries that were either unsettled wilderness or were practicing barbaric cultural customs like sati, burning widows. So I'm very glad that the British Empire decided to do that. I'm very glad that Britain were net emigrants, and I'm not at all buying the line that we are comprised of a nation of immigrants when immigration has been historically so low that we've actually lost more British people than we've gained newcomers. I mean, remember, okay, after the expulsions of Jews, for example, in the Middle Ages, it was only Oliver Cromwell that let them back in. So for those hundreds of years, again, there were very few immigrants, and the only sort of immigrant groups that we would hold up as exemplars of assimilation, so British Jews or the Huguenots, of which Nigel Farage is a member, they don't cause the same kind of trouble that recent new arrivals have, particularly from Africa and the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent. And also, where is the Huguenot lobbying group? Where is the Huguenot advocacy agency that is demanding greater Huguenot representation in Parliament and the NHS? If anything, they're starting to stop the one man with a Huguenot surname from becoming Prime Minister, David, whose party that you are now chairman of. Immigration is not the lifeblood of Britain. We are not a nation of immigrants. These talking points have been refuted in a very good blog post by Migration Watch UK quite some time ago, and there's just one stat here that really jumps out to me. The English of 1927 were more than 90% the descendants of the English of 927, which makes it entirely untrue to talk of a nation of immigrants. We have had one long, unbroken chain of lineage between the Britons, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Celts, who are the settled and indigenous peoples of these isles. And so, to say Britain is a nation of immigrants, to say, as Rishi Sunak did, grinning next to his minted coin, that diversity built Britain, is a lie, and it is a slur against the native people, saying you would be nothing if we had not substituted you and your culture with foreigners. If that is Reform UK's line, how am I meant to support that? It is the exact same treacherous line that the likes of Michael Gove and James Cleverly delivered at the dispatch box when the Conservatives were in charge. Now, there are other problems with David Bull as well, and I'm sorry, I don't want to be rude to the chap because he's been courteous to me, but he is just not the man for the moment. He had previously tweeted out, because Nigel Farage got in some hot water, I think it was 2014, when he said that, as world leader of UKIP, we shouldn't be admitting HIV-positive migrants. Like, we shouldn't be battery farming AIDS patients in the UK and letting them use the NHS, which is incredibly sensible. And we have had a massive spike in AIDS cases and HIV cases in the UK ever since the Boris wave opened its doors to sub-Saharan Africa, and the overwhelming majority of new cases are from migrants. But Farage said, we shouldn't be a global health service. I don't think people with life-threatening diseases should be treated by our National Health Service, and that is an absolutely essential condition for working out proper immigration policy. Perfectly sensible. David Bull tweeted, Nigel Farage's comments are ill-judged, prejudiced, and dangerous. HIV can affect anyone, regardless of sex, race, and class. That's untrue. It's untrue. Sorry, if you don't do drugs, if you don't have promiscuous, unprotected sex, particularly gay sex, you're not going to get AIDS. You're not. If you are in a monogamous, marital, heterosexual relationship, your chance of getting AIDS is next to zero unless you are attacked somehow by a HIV carrier. So that's not true. And he's been a Brexit Party MP and a long-time Reform loyalist. He was former deputy leader, etc. But it does show that his instincts are out of lockstep with the majority of the country and the majority of Reform supporters. It actually matters less that he's insulted Farage, because they clearly seem to be friends. This is a photo of them from yesterday. What matters is he's just incorrect on this. And there are lots of tweets that have been dug up of him saying that 9-year-olds need LGBT education and that Angela Merkel was right to declare Wir schaffen das and allow in all of the Syrians and Afghans via Germany's refugee system. So he's just too squishy for what the country needs and where reforms base already are. And I argued with him before on Breakfast TV, and this was in early 2024, about the death penalty. And I want to play this short clip because David gets hysterical about the fact that murderers and the people that perpetrate the worst kinds of crimes on the innocent and children would feel some sort of suffering and pain were they given the death penalty. He seems more concerned about the well-being of criminals than of families and their victims. And I just think this shows their instincts as a party and their leadership are in the wrong place.
I've got to come back to what you said at the beginning of this interview, because I can't get that out of my head, which is that you would support the death penalty, and not just the death penalty, but the death penalty by hanging. You were talking about going back decades and decades. What would that say?
Are you talking about public hangings?
Oh, it wouldn't necessarily need to be in the public square or anything like that, but...
Why hanging?
Because it's the cheapest method of doing it and it's a British tradition.
But nothing about humanity here, does it not matter?
Why should I care about the humanity of a child rapist or a serial killer?
Because you are stooping.
No, I'm not.
As low. If you want to take someone's life in a cruel, inhumane way...
I don't think it's cruel and inhumane. I don't think it's cruel and inhumane. Because these people...
Do you know what you do to someone when you hang them? You break the odontoid peg. You break their neck.
Yes.
And they then are strangulated. They suffer extreme hypoxia.
Okay.
It is not a nice way to die.
I'm not bothered. Hang on.
For that person's life, as you say, they
because
gave
if they've
to
raped
them.
and murdered a child, yeah, I don't care about their
life.
life.
I understand some of these people.
As you can tell, I was slightly mystified by everyone's moral indignation about the fact that a child murderer would feel some discomfort in their moments of a short drop and a sudden stop. Again, the fact that there is such hysteria around a policy that the majority of the public and Reform supporters would support shows that they don't understand their own base, they don't understand the voting public, and if they're going to behave this way, well, they're not going to attract the sort of young, energized right-wing cohort, of which I think I'm a fair representative, to join their party as spokespeople, as potential candidates, and to work under them in a Reform government, because what of course matters is the hundreds of administrative staff they will need to repopulate the civil service with to ensure that, unlike Trump's first term, their agenda isn't just thwarted by malicious non-compliance by activist government employees. And, again, this is a trend. I mean, there's a clip here of Richard Tice and David Bull saying that they wanted mandatory vaccination for care workers and NHS workers during the COVID pandemic, which, I'll be careful what I say on YouTube, but I don't support that policy, and it didn't seem to be particularly effective, and on principle I'm against violations of people's bodily autonomy in such a way, so I think that would be a disqualifying factor. I think all of these things would be disqualifying factors for being in a position of seniority in an insurgent populist party that's meant to be a break from the unionist party establishment, that's meant to reject the policies of lockdown that ruined our economy and the lives of children, that is meant to reject mass immigration policy, a failed multicultural management policy, that is meant to reject the narratives which keep that policy sustained, like Britain is a nation of immigrants. Without immigrants, we would be nothing. We would be weak and feeble and not fit for purpose. That's wrong. I just want a party that doesn't have dripping contempt for the people that it's trying to represent and govern on behalf of. And this contempt is portrayed again by Richard Tice in an interview he's done with Stephen Edgington of GB News, where he was presented with the news from a new study by Matt Goodwin, who is affiliated with Reform, that by 2063, the white British will be a minority in their own home, their own country. He reacted to this news by saying, well, Stephen, you're obsessed with this, it's juvenile. I'll be long dead, so it doesn't matter, it's a non-issue. and then let's see what happens, and on we go, as if he is content to continue running this experiment of population substitution and cultural eradication, which has no democratic consent by not just the wider public, but is fervently opposed by reform's own voters and supporters.
And he predicts that by 2063, Britain will be minority white British. Is that a concern of yours at all?
Yeah, I don't think that's I haven't seen those predictions, and 2063 is a long way off. But
it's a few decades.
Yeah, it's a few decades. Well, it's I'm trying to do the maths quickly in my head, but it's in most people. I'll be long gone. Put it like that. I think that the UK is we are a Christian nation. We should stand up and be proud of that. And let's see what happens. But at the end of the day, what we should be focusing on is getting our own people back into work, training up our own people, having, in a sense, Nigel's talked quite recently about families. We need more British-born people, so that we need to be less reliant on immigration, and that's the issue. And on we go.
It will be a huge moment, though, in British history. For the first time ever in this nation's more than 1,000 years of proud history, the country will be minority white British. And many
that. You're obsessed with this stuff, okay?
So many other people, Rich. It's not just me, to be fair.
The way you ask the questions, right? Matt Goodwin's made a forecast. He may or may not be right, right? I don't know what his computer model is. I've not seen it, but the sensible discussion to have is what sort of population do we want to have? Can we make that population more prosperous? Can we have a high quality, highly skilled immigration policy? And yeah, it's like one of these things. It's a bit like what we started on in terms of do you want to ban the burqa? Let's have a discussion about it.
And
I'm sorry, the homogenous high trust culture of my country that I treasure, my history, my heritage, is not up for discussion as to whether or not that should be destroyed. No, I don't think it should be a discussion. I think that the fact that Richard Tice did not have a ready answer for this, or the fact that he did not speak from a place of conviction and seemed to try to dance around public perceptions, because later in the interview he accused Stephen of asking questions in such a way that everyone will say, oh, Tice is a terrible person, which means that he doesn't act from principle. He instead entirely lives in the opinions of others, and so will always be shaped by people calling him mean names, which will mean the party will tack to the left according to the standards of its enemies. But the fact that he didn't have a ready answer about this means that he probably hasn't even thought about it. How is that acceptable? As David Betts, the professor from King's College London, who's principally concerned about the way that immigration, ethnic identity politics, and multiculturalism will cause civil war, as he put on X in response to this, this should be a completely disqualifying statement from any politician. Not just it should prevent you from being elected because you do not care about the people that you're purporting to represent, but it should disqualify you from running a government. And this is the mentality that Reform's going to government with. And again, this is not to say there aren't decent people in Reform trying their best, but this is the leadership, guys. A party is not just the branding or the name, it is the people that comprise the party. And I've been told time and time again, Reform are practicing a Ming Vase strategy. They just have to win over the squishy moderate centrists and then they'll be truly right-wing. Well, okay, a couple of things. Number one, I don't like being lied to and then expecting my loyalty to be retained by the time the next election comes around. But also, if the people carrying the Ming vase by the time you get to the finish line do not believe in carrying the vase in the first place, they will drop it. And this looks to me like dropping the vase. Now, if you're dropping the vase well ahead of the election, there's still time to clear up the pieces. But I don't like being told that this is the great white hope for Britain, with help coming over the horizon as our country falls into, yes, economic disrepair, but cultural incoherence, and the white British enter a stage of demographic obsolescence, and your response is, on we go. That's just not acceptable. And Nigel Farage is guilty of all this too. He is. And again, if you criticise Farage, you will be put on the complete outside of Reform. That's fine. I don't want to be a candidate. I just want Reform to do what it at least is meant to say on the tin. And it is currently occupying the space at the top of the polls and also the space in public imagination as the right-wing populist party that's going to do things about immigration. But with an attitude like this, it's just not. So Nigel Farage was asked at his Welsh speech yesterday, basically, how do you define a Welsh person? And he gives an answer that Fraser Nelson would give, and an answer that would actually put Raxel Rudder-Cabana as a Welshman.
You say that you would like to give priority to people from Wales for housing. How would you define a Welsh person?
Well, it's a very fair question from your channel. We hadn't proposed the Welsh language test. No, look, it's got to be somebody who's lived and is settled in Wales, has paid taxes and obeyed the law. And if someone's done that for a 5 or 10 year period, then I think they've every right to say that they're fully part of the Welsh community.
No, they don't. They don't have every right to say that. The only people that have a right to admit them are the Welsh people themselves, who are the descendants of the native Welsh, so the Celtic peoples. And the irony is, he's saying that we're not going to apply the Welsh language test. Okay, Keir Starmer is now applying an English language test to new visas. So Farage is technically to the left of Keir Starmer on that position. And Rupert Lowe put a good reply, as he always does. And he's put, I could live in Japan for 5 years, that wouldn't make me Japanese. And then someone did a very humorous edit, of course, of him being a Japanese man. Point being, no other country, very few countries in the history of the world, other than those hopped up on the grey goo identity of delusional liberalism to avoid being called a racist ever since the atrocities of 1945, very few of them would think about their own identity in this way. You might well be my countryman, you might well be legally a citizen, you might well be invited to my wedding, but that does not make you inextricably a member of the same identity tribe as those whose ancestors have been traced back to 1066. I'm sorry, but for example, I always use the example of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Absolutely wonderful, knows the Western canon inside out, has adopted the religion of the place, is married to Neil Ferguson. She would never dream of saying she is as indistinguishably British as I am, who has English and Irish ancestry, and yes, a little bit of French for my sins. She would never say, me, born to Somalian parents in Somalia, grew up in Somalia, that she is identically British to people who can trace their lineage back to Hengist and Horsa. But strangely, it only takes apparently 5 or 10 years of living in a country and paying taxes to be that for Reform UK. This is an absurd proposition, and I'm sorry, but you cannot found an insurgent political movement on falsehoods, like Britain is a nation of immigrants, and that you're as British as you and me if you are in the country for 5 years and work for big issue. I mean, and then there are a series of clips here that have been compiled by this account. I saw this tweet a few days ago. Farage has consistently said things off the cuff that insult the voters, that betray the modus operandi of the party, which means dealing with culture and demographic change through mass legal and illegal migration. It's a consistent and disheartening pattern that just makes it, frankly, difficult, bordering on impossible to continue to retain faith in reform.
It's a political impossibility to deport hundreds of thousands of people. We simply can't do it. At the moment, it's a political impossibility.
But is it your ambition?
No. I'm not going to get dragged down the route of mass deportations or anything like that. I mean, people are always going to come and go, and we are a country that's engaged in international trade, and we have relationships around the world through the Commonwealth, etc. But yeah, we have to aim at a balanced migration policy.
But net zero still means hundreds of thousands of people coming into Britain, immigrants coming into Britain. Isn't that too many?
It may well be, but we have to start somewhere.
Trump says in America that he wants mass deportations. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants are in Britain at the moment. Some estimates say the number could even be in, 1 million plus. So do you support deporting all of those people?
It's impossible to do. Literally impossible to do.
In terms of the atmosphere in Britain, are you concerned that there is a rising level of anti-white hatred?
I'm just concerned about a deeply divided society. But the nub of it is,
he says that he has to appease political Islam, otherwise we will lose, to which I ask, what would winning look like? Which parts of Islamic doctrine do you want to incorporate and appease as part of Reform's party platform?
We have a Muslim population in Britain growing by about 75% every 10 years. Right? That's just where we are.
Mm-hmm.
If we politically alienate the whole of Islam, we will lose. We'll lose.
So how does one include
We
them?
will lose. By 2050, goodness knows what kind of a terrible state we're going to be in.
Mm-hmm.
But the number on X in particular is full of vile trolls, particularly the alt-right types, who have been just outright horrific towards Zia right from the very start.
And then insulting voters as Zia Yusuf departs and then insults Nigel. And I think this was essentially a plea to try and stop Zia from screwing the party over on his way out because he has so much leverage. But to repeatedly sink to the level of calling people like Ben Habib alt-right, or your own supporters who didn't like Zia Yusuf alt-right, presumably me included, when alt-right means white nationalist in the American context, so it's not even applicable to the UK context. Why do you feel the need in Reform, in its leadership, not everyone in the party, but to say that we can't do mass deportations, it's a political impossibility, and then have to revert back to that position when you read the polling that says that 99% of your voters expect it, thanks to Adam Wren, or when I said it at the Reform Conference last September? Why do you feel the need to accommodate Islam when they will vote for sectarian Islamic independent candidates if it's on offer, no matter what, and therefore you convert your party into party indistinguishable from the likes of the Cameron Conservatives, which sought to do the exact same thing and gave rise to Raiku and the Islamic Network in the Home Office and the entire apparatus of state that tells the British public, don't blame Islam and don't look back in anger anytime someone reads the Quran a bit too seriously and detonates a nail bomb at a pop concert. And why do you feel the need to dismiss people who desperately want to support you and encourage you to live up to your potential and actually deal with the problems that we need dealt with? Why do you dismiss them as racists and Indian bots? And Farage did this repeatedly. He did this on Times Radio after Zia's departure and return. He did this on GB News. He did this actually after Zia Yusuf reported Rupert Lowe to the police and he announced local councillor defections, and he was speaking to Chris Chope on GB News. And again, he just says that there is an army of online racists online and that therefore criticism of Zia Yusuf is itself illegitimate.
It's a young party, eight months old, you've been in charge, everyone understands that. Who is the senior member of your party who has faced online abuse and racism?
Oh, it's not very hard to work it out. It's the chairman. Frankly, what's been said about him over the course of the last 2 weeks, I mean, all of these people, had it been Diane Abbott or somebody else that had received this, I mean, you can't imagine what the media coverage would have been, but because it's us and it's Zia, no one cares. It's awful.
Is it sanctioned, do you think, by the big parties?
I can't comment on that because nobody on X or on those forums would openly say they were Labour or Conservative. So I'm not going to go there. But it's been pretty nasty stuff. I mean, plenty of nasty stuff at me too. But
Look, I'm not encouraging anyone to denigrate Zia Yusuf on the colour of his skin. I think that's wrong. But then to criticise his religion, which means a system of beliefs akin to politics, that's not the same as insulting him for his skin colour. And to conflate those two is the sort of thing that Reform's, at least in principle, enemies would do to try and trip the party up and call it racist and sink its chances. So you're actually legitimising the attacks on your party that your enemies would make. I mean, at this conference, actually, Farage referenced an article in the Times by Danny Finkelstein, who's a card-carrying member of the Cameron Tory revolution. And in the article, Finkelstein says that Farage, like David Cameron, is a moderniser. Zia Yusuf, as a Muslim entrepreneur, is key to that modernising of the party. And if he doesn't keep Zia Yusuf as a front face, then he's going to live up to the insult that David Cameron paid UKIP, which was full of cranks, nut jobs, and closet racists. And Farage praised that piece, which insults a lot of his supporters as closet racists. What is with the consistent instinct to just attack your own supporters? It's really demoralising. And I'm just telling you now, guys, it's putting people off. It's really putting people off. I don't know any young, intelligent, self-made, right-wing personality who has hope in reform or wants to join it. I know plenty of names, you know, sort of people that write for the Telegraph or appear on GB News or have a large audience. None of them who aren't career grifters want to join reform because they know that they will get Rupert Lowe's treatment if they say the wrong thing. Or they will be told to take a party line and betray their principles just to get ahead. And they're just not prepared to do it. And they're especially not prepared to do it because they know that things are far too bad to be trotting out the line that Britain is a nation of immigrants. It's too late in the day for this stuff. Our civilization is up against the wall here. And we can't be appeasing people who would rather see us fail and disband than succeed, especially when the electorate will be with us. If reform are here, where they are at the moment, right, and the electorate is here, then the people that they want to recruit from, the pool of young right-wing entrepreneurs, political entrepreneurs, they are over here. And so that means that not only are you losing some of the voting public because you're not as hard-edged as you should be and can get away with being, and that it would gain you votes to be, but it means that you're basically losing everyone who is way out ahead of you. And they are the competent ones. And then, as well, either put up or shut up with his Indian bot allegation. Farage keeps repeating the fact that Indian bots are behind Rupert Lowe, which is hilarious because Rupert Lowe then did an edit of himself as an Indian man. He has said multiple times at the local elections rally where he said, you know, we do support, of course, removing every illegal immigrant. And if you heard otherwise, then you've just been misled by Indian bots on X. Sorry, we all heard the clip of you in the Stephen Edgington interview where you said it's a political impossibility and it's not your ambition. And then, again, when Zia Yusuf left the party and flounced out, only to do the hokey cokey and return 2 days later, he told Martin Daubney on GB News, everyone who had criticised Zia Yusuf had just been misled by Indian bots.
The online reaction from Reform UK supporters and voters has to be said, quite a lot of happiness in the air that Mr Yusuf has gone. Why do you think that is? What was it about the voter base of Reform UK that may have?
I think that the persistent campaign against him on X, and much of it coming from Indian bots,
right,
has perhaps, you know, made some Reform members question him, question his motives. All of that's completely unfair.
It's not just Indian bots, and I don't think Farage believes it, but I think, again, you can't base an insurgent populist party that's trying to break up the uniparty consensus on falsehoods. You can't just keep lying and keep insulting your supporters. Let's put it this way. If other political forces that emerge start to take notice, it will be a natural brain drain away from reform to them. And that could well mean that reform still wins an election and that all those people have wasted their time on another enterprise. But would you rather they not waste their time? Would you rather that all of their energy and ideas are put to use in your vehicle? And would you rather that once you've won the election, you hit the ground running and govern competently and fix the problems in the country? Or would you rather not be called racist by the BBC and instead call your own supporters racist?